Hard to believe this is our fifth and final session. It's flown by. We've had lots of great discussions. I am very pleased to have Marlena Ewald, our government contract practice back, and Jane Johansen, also of our government contract practice, join us today. Throughout all of our sessions, we've been touching on this great intersection between government contracts, this new thing of generative AI in the law. Today, we kind of bring it all together and talk just broadly about the risks and the potential of generative AI in government contracting. Here at Fluid, we've been representing government contractors for over a decade. I myself have worked in government contracting, both as a government contractor and advising in a government contracts firm. Marlena and Jane have similar backgrounds as well. All of us are intrigued and excited about the advent of generative AI, but we're also putting on our lawyer hats, have some concerns, but also have ideas on how to mitigate those concerns. So let's start off by having Marlena and Jane introduce themselves. So Marlena?
Yeah, thanks, France. I'm happy to be here. As you said, I'm a partner at Fluid in our government contracts practice group. We help all government contractors in a variety of aspects, compliance, protests, contract matters, acquisitions. We're pretty much here for the life cycle of a government contractor, and really excited to speak on this topic as it's becoming more and more important to our clients, and the government is continuing to put out more and more regulation and guidance on this in this area.
Great. Jane?
Hi, I'm Jane Johansen, counsel here at Fluid, and I'm also happy to be speaking about this topic today. Like was described, I'm on the government contracts practice and also work with the corporate transactions and M&A practice here, and ready to get right into it.
Great. Well, before we dive into the topic, Marlena and Jane would love to hear how, if at all, you're using generative AI, but not at work. Mm-hmm. What are some non-work uses of generative AI that you've experimented with?
Yeah, so I can go first. I've played around with it a little bit, definitely not at work at this point, but just kind of putting different prompts in a chat box and seeing what it does, but nothing too complicated. I know there's a lot of different things that you can do with it. So I think I'm in the more experimental level right now.
Great. And yourself, Jane?
I would say the same. I've been using Doodlebot. I've been trying different ways of using it. It's interesting to see when I make up a legal question. It's nice to see that it will come back and say to me, oh, this is not for legal advice, right? But then I'm finding that to make a good use of the tools, and I've compared it to just some of the other general things that are out there for Google and whatnot, but it's really important to understand how to ask questions, how to prompt it. What I find, and I've used some examples, what do I do if I'm just making things up? What if I'm trying to embark upon a project to remodel a residential home? How do I engage contractors? What are the things to look at? How do I write a document? And I'll just pick a different topic. And this is my experience, if I say things like, how do I write such and such? You get kind of a generic answer. And that really isn't any better than what maybe I would do myself. But I'm trying to learn how to ask questions, kind of ask things in reverse or ask very specific questions. And then I think it starts to become helpful. And it's helping me to envision maybe down the road how to use it in a legal practice at some point.
Yeah, Jane, you bring up a great point, and we've talked about this before in earlier webinars. This is very interesting technology because it's the first technology that actually cares who you are, what the context is, and why you're trying to do something. And the more you treat generative AI like a colleague rather than a tool, the better results you get.
Right.
For us that are of a certain age, we have years, perhaps decades of habits and muscle memory in using technology, and that's not the way we use technology. I don't sit there and down there with Excel and say, hello, Excel, how are you doing today, right? I'm France. Today, we're going to work on a balance sheet, okay? And this is we're not used to that. That is actually the way you should treat generative AI. You should treat it like a colleague. Tell it who you are, what role you want it to have, the context in which it's working, what success looks like, what matters to you, and you will go from something that is, like you said, Jane, not much better than what you could probably do yourself or get out of a simple web search to something that is really could be phenomenal, right? A 70, 80% solution, not 100%, but a 70, 80%. I saw this great quote that is a much more succinct way of something I've been saying, which is AI is not going to take your job, but somebody using AI might. And I think that's a fair summary of where we're headed. This is going to become a nice to have tool where we're playing around with it to become a must-have skill that we're all going to need to have. So that's a good segue into government contracting. So we have, I think, over 100 clients at the firm that are in the government contracting space. Marlena and Jane, you work with them all the time. Could you give some examples between the two of you on some of the ways that government contractors are using AI, both internally, right, for their own work, or externally for their customers?
Yeah, so I can jump in first. I think, you put it really well. When I think of it in the internal and external category. So I think they're either using it internally, developing their own AI, or using a third party AI to, go through applications, let's say, or something in the employment sector, or analyze software, or even create, go through solicitations, help with like a first draft of a proposal. And then, there's the external use, which is more, either selling their own AI to the government, or incorporating a third party's AI in the product or service that they're providing to the government. So I definitely think there's different ways that it's being incorporated right now. And the government, I think, is increasing its request for prototypes and different products and services that it'll be looking to procure in the near future.
Great. Jane, do you have some examples you can provide?
I think the example that I've seen developing and that I think is a real need in the government contract space is helping, of course, as Marlena said, you have the internal uses, and then you have how you're going to provide products and services to your clients, in this case, various government agencies. How can you provide assistance to your government customers to help that human interface? Right now, the government, they've got massive databases, they have big data, they've got big programs. And for example, their IT systems right now are using machine learning. They've been working with natural language processing all along. These are skilled individuals, especially in the military. And their IT staff is great. And they're, like I say, they've got data hubs that they're using to monitor their systems, to look for intrusions, to see what can be more efficient. But those IT individuals are overworked, and they're hard to find. So what kind of solutions can you provide to the agency that helps them set up their data hub? The IT operator might be sitting there looking at 6 screens with lots of messages, but they have to still, as a human, decide which ones are more important. How do I prioritize them? Which ones do I take action on? Right now, our area for development is if you can provide an AI tool that focuses them and guides them to figure out, okay, which of these 75 exceptions in this report that I just got, which ones really require human interaction? Can the rest be automated?
Great. I'll throw in some examples just from what I've seen. These are more aimed at the internal uses of generative AI. And these, in many cases, they're not going to be specific to GovCons because, frankly, a lot of work GovCons do internally is not dissimilar to the work that other companies do, right? But I think for government contractor who's always looking for ways to be more efficient, more effective, there's lots of possibilities in using generative AI to get to a 70-80% solution in a fraction of the time. So I think we're all aware that when using generative AI, you can do internet research in a much more efficient manner. Instead of getting a long list of links, you actually get a summary. People are using generative AI to generate artwork, generate the first drafts of plans, generate summaries. You can take a large text, say a proposal, and ask generative AI to produce a 100-word summary of it. You can ask it to analyze text. You can take a proposal and say, gosh, what are the 5 key points from this proposal? Generative AI has been used for brainstorming. You can feed it your entire capabilities statement and then give a proposal and ask it, hey, using my capabilities, brainstorm 10 ways that it matches the requirements of this proposal, right? And it can do that matching between 2 different documents. It can generate recommendations for different courses of action, right? Hey, I want to engage with a particular customer. Here's all the information about the customer. Here's all the information about the company. Suggest 10 ways for further customer engagement. Obviously, it does a fairly great job of editing text. You can put in text and ask it to rewrite it. Rewrite this in a more professional style. Remove all of the spelling, punctuation, and grammar errors. I use that one a lot. It can generate first drafts of lots of different kinds of letters, including letters to customers or including letters to primes or to subs. And it can also do some role playing. So this is kind of a more advanced case, but you can actually assign a role to generative AI. I want you to play the role of a red team member, right? Here is our proposal. Shoot all the hole, and here is the RFP. Shoot all the holes you can in this. Identify all the weaknesses, and if you structure the conversation right, it will actually act like a red team member. So fascinating where these uses are going. Okay, so how would you, Marlena and Jane, how would you summarize the usage of generative AI at this point? I mean, if you were to read the news and read social media, it sounds like the entire world is using generative AI, and you're way behind the power curve if you're not an early adopter of this. My personal experience is that's not true. But Marlena and Jane, what are you seeing in terms of actual adoption of these things we just talked about?
Yeah, I don't think people are behind the curve at this point. I think it's a new and exciting area, and I think obviously some people are going to be, more comfortable. They've worked with it more. They, are integrating it more into their business faster, and other people are going to be a little bit more thoughtful about it. Not to say, that you can't be quick and thoughtful, but I think, other people are going to take their time, but ultimately will probably find a use for it in their business, depending on their business needs. And so I don't think, companies should necessarily feel like they're behind the curve. And, we have a lot of clients that are using it, and some that, haven't started using it and are coming to us and, trying to be thinking through what their policy should be on AI use at this point.
Yeah. Jane, can you talk to this phenomenon? I feel like I've talked to a lot of organizations that are kind of cautiously allowing it, I think is the best way. They're not endorsing it in the sense of like telling people to use it. For the folks that want to use it, they're letting them use it, but they're putting guardrails around it. Don't put any company information in. Be careful about what you say into a context window, and then let us know how it goes. Is that the approach you're seeing some companies take at this point, Jane?
Yeah, it's the shiny new thing, right? And there are always individuals that jump on board more quickly than others. And I think you're right that every organization has to think about this. There's really no getting around it. It's use it to your advantage. And, while, like Marlena said, nobody's really behind at this point, at some point that will start to happen where companies kind of fall behind, or even individuals fall behind. And I think that one of the things I was reading lately is people like it, they want to use it, and they're also a little worried about it. I read an article in the Financial Times 2 days ago where somebody was saying, well, you know, if everyone's going to start using it and even into generate emails to each other, to my colleagues at different companies, etc., are we suddenly going to become less courteous, even less courteous than now, because everybody knows that your email was generated, you know, from AI, and so our common courtesy is going to fall by the wayside. I mean, there's just wild predictions about what will happen. But I think that another way I've been thinking about it is kind of think about it in the market, in a competition. You have offense and you have defense. Think of it offensively in terms of how you're going to use it to provide to your customers. And I think even right now for companies where they don't necessarily have a plan for using AI for their offerings in the market, they need to be thinking defensively about their IP, their data. I think everyone's familiar with the importance of privacy laws and privacy rights and how data gets disclosed. But if you look at case law, the people that bring in cases right now seem somewhat surprised at what has happened. The early adopters, the early AI companies have made use of data in ways that wasn't anticipated by individuals. And they, every company right now, and you may not have the resources to do this, maybe you need help in some way to do this, but you need to take a look at your intellectual property portfolio. You need to take a look at your data compliance and make sure you're understanding what's out there of yours that could be used and abused or misconstrued by third parties. Do you need to do periodic audits? Do you need to do periodic looks out in the environment to see where you might have some weaknesses, so that you're not in the situation of needing to you know, try to sue OpenAI because they scraped your data and you didn't even think about it until it was too late. So that's the defensive side of things.
So Marlena, if you're a GovCon and you're thinking about allowing the use of generative AI, and by the way, I've also heard of cases where employees are using this even without telling their employers, right? Because it is just so useful, right? You have a job where all of a sudden you can get it done in 20% of the time using generative AIs. You're going to use it and maybe not tell your employer directly, right? So what are some of the things that GovCon should consider regarding, you know, how and when to use generative AI inside their organizations?
Sure. So, I mean, you know, I think first, as you said, consider whether or not your employees might be using it, because that might speed up the process as to whether or not you want to develop a policy or think through how it's maybe going to affect your products, you know, your IP rights to those products. But then also, you know, consider your contract requirements, right? If you're going to be using AI under a contract, make sure that you know it's allowed and you're not going to be in violation of the contract itself. And then also, you know, for GovCons as well, the regulatory environment, there's a lot of guidance developing right now, and I think it cuts both ways for consideration. One, you want to, you know, make sure that you know the guidance so that you're compliant or the regulation, but also I think it informs government contractors on the flip side of what the government is looking for, right? So the government puts out this guidance or regulation of what requirements it's, you know, it wants its government contractors to abide by, but I think it also foreshadows, you know, what they're going to be looking for, which is ultimately a trusted partner, right? Somebody with trusted AI, more reliability. I mean, about a year ago, the White House put out a blueprint for AI Bill of Rights, and it set out 5 different principles that they, you know, were putting out as guidance. But, you know, effectively, that's what the government is going to be looking for. And so I think it's important to take all of those factors in consideration when you're using AI.
Yeah. Marlena or Jane, do you recommend that government contractors at this point having some sort of policy around the use of generative AI?
Yes, I mean, I can, Jane, feel free to jump in. So it depends, right? Like I said, you want to scale things, right? Depending on what industry you're in, what your employee numbers are. I mean, we work with small businesses, we work with large businesses, medium, so we never want to make a general recommendation that's not going to work for, where you are. So if you're a small business and you have a small number of employees, and maybe, while it would be nice to have a formal policy in place, and if you don't think they're using it and you're providing services, there's different factors, but in general, I would say it's a good idea to have a policy in place, because at a minimum, even if it isn't the most robust policy, it starts a discussion, right? It puts an idea in your employee's head that this is something that matters to their employer, and it opens up a discussion to kind of further develop that policy as your regulations continue to develop as well.
Got it. Jane, is there a difference between the use of generative AI internally, right, for in the company, right, inside a government contractor, versus externally for work that leaves or work being done for a government client or customer? Are those, is there a fundamental difference between those, you think?
Well, in theory, it's about the same topics, but I think there's a huge difference especially if you're a government contractor or even a commercial vendor, trying to sell products and services that either use generative AI or that are the tools for generative AI. It's just a huge difference. The benefits are much greater, but the risks can be a lot greater if you don't have the right procedures in place for how you've got the tools licensed. If you're using third parties tools for a product that you're going to be providing to any customer, whether it's a government customer or not, you may have indemnification obligations. You may need to make sure that all of your licensors have the types of policies that are consistent with the needs of your customer. So there's just much more to look at, I think. The issues are the same, but I think there's a whole lot more to look at when you're bringing something to market. Got it.
So government contractors are no strangers to regulations. They are awash in them. What's the regulatory environment? What applies to a government contractor who's thinking about using generative AI? What's the regulatory framework?
So there are, as Marlena mentioned, I think people are familiar a little bit, or some people are very familiar with the Blueprint for AI Bill of Rights from last year, but there are other regulations as well, but I'm going to focus on 2023. 2023 has been very busy in terms of the regulatory environment. And yeah, I think government contractors, every couple of weeks, something new comes out. The few things I want to mention, in April of 2023, the Homeland Security announced the AI task force. That task force mission is to drive specific application of AI to advance critical Homeland Security missions. And so that kind of started the ball rolling on some of these task force. More recently, Task Force Lima was established by Department of Defense. This was in August. The Chief Digital and AI Office, which was established by DoD in 2022, has now established this task force, and its purpose is to better understand how generative AI tools like large language models and others can help innovation, but while being used responsibly. Then in addition, in September in 2023, I'm kind of listing these on purpose, from different places, National Security Agency Director announced the creation of a new entity for development and integration of artificial intelligence capabilities within the U.S. national security systems. It's the AI Security Center. So that's just three things, right? So now you see all these establishments of these new task force and guidelines across the various agencies. So now what? In addition to that, we have, I think a lot of people are aware of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, the NIST management or AI risk management framework. But then Monday, the big event happened in that President Biden issued the executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. I think that if you're tracking any of this at all, it kind of became obvious there's all these efforts and all these needs and risks and just being developed everywhere. Now we have this executive order that kind of encompasses everything. On Monday, lucky for us, in front of our presentation ahead of it, this was issued. I did spend a bit of time reading the 63-page document, and it directs NIST and other agencies to develop guidelines and best practices to promote consensus industry standards regarding development and deployment of safe, secure, and trustworthy AI. So this is huge. There's a lot to it. To kind of gel it down to three simple areas. Again, strengthen AI governance, advance responsible AI. Now, this is in light of other countries as well, also undertaking their own guidances, right? And they've got their own laws and how they want this to be developed for opportunities in these different jurisdictions. So the US is a leader and needs to stay a leader, but this needs to be coordinated. One other thing I want to mention, just a big aspect of this, is now there's a public website, ai.gov, that anybody can go out and take a look at. One of the directives in the executive order is for the OMB to issue a memo to all the heads of various executive departments and agencies on how they're going to do this. And they are taking public comment for it. The deadline to receive all the public comments at the moment is December 5th. And you can go out there and you can see the current draft of this proposed memo. So I think that's all rather exciting, and just in one word, just huge. A couple things though, I want to, if we have time, I want to turn my focus under the things that I was able to pick up on as I quickly ran through the executive order, trying to focus on what is important for government contractors. Of course, all of it is important for government contractors, but one of the things it focuses on is there's a section on reducing risks posed by and they have a definition of synthetic content. So there are guidances about how they want to identify, authenticate, and label synthetic content. Synthetic content is things that are generated by AI, and government contractors may have synthetic content in their offerings to government agencies, so they want to kind of take a look at that. Also, the government wants to promote innovation for small businesses, so there's a section on that. There's also a section on strengthening AI and civil rights. And within 365 days of the order, the Secretary of Labor needs to publish guidance for federal contractors regarding non-discrimination in hiring involving AI and other technology-based hiring systems. So federal contractors are called out by name in that particular section of this executive order. There's a lot of other things in there. I don't want to just go through a laundry list and mention it, but government contractors kind of need to take a look at this, do some searches on the word contractor, do some searches on, opportunities and acquisitions. One other big thing in there is they are considering maybe making a modification to the FAR with respect to how some of this is going to work. And also GSA, it also has a task. So these action items and the implementation goes across all various government agencies. It's going to be really interesting in the coming year to see how all of this happens. And it just seems like it's going to be one thing after the other. Government contractors are really going to need to track these things and make sure that they can comply.
Yeah. Well, every government contractor is quite familiar with having to comply with regulations. This looks like yet a layer they're going to have to comply with. So Marlena, we kind of touched on this a couple of times already. I think there is a fundamental difference if you're using generative AI internally, right? You're writing internal memos, or you're writing internal analysis, or you're generating ideas. It doesn't leave the company. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So I think the scrutiny that output, that generated AI content undergoes, is going to be lower than if you create something using AI that goes out to the outside world, right? Whether it gets commercialized or whether it goes to a government customer, which you should obviously disclose. So in that case, right, in the case of generating content, potential intellectual property using AI, what are some of the things, Marlena, that a government contractor should consider?
Yeah, so I mean, I would agree, right? The more that you're going to make it external, right, the more you potentially open yourself up to liability from others, from third parties. And I think it's really important to protect your IP as you would, putting the AI piece aside. When you're a government contractor, there's different data rights that you get. You're still going to want to do your same limited rights, restricted rights assertions, or if you're a commercial product, make sure that those are incorporated in your contract. So those aren't necessarily going to change, but I think as far as protecting your IP, you're still going to want to do those things, but then also make sure that you are the owner of that IP, right? And that it's not just generated by an AI source, which right now, under the Copyright Act and the Copyright Office, has now come out and said if it's not human created, right, it may not have that copyright protection. It's going to look at it, the circumstances, but you're going to want to make sure essentially that you own it, right, before you go and tell the government that you do. And then to the extent it's a third party AI that's being incorporated into your product or service, for example, understanding what the licensing requirements are associated with that tool. And then, even if you are using it internally, to generate something like a proposal, for example, right? Maybe you help a first draft, use it to help a first draft, and then a human reviews it. You want to be careful of what you're uploading, right, into third-party sources, to make sure that you're continuing to protect, especially if anything's containing like a trade secret, for example, and understanding really where you're putting this data.
Yeah, so let's double tap on that trade secret issue. I think several of us have heard of this case. I think it was Samsung. Some of their engineers put in code into a generative AI system that ended up exposing that proprietary information to the outside world. And if I understand right, they were deemed to have lost trade secret protection on that code that was entered. Is that the sort of concern you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You want to make sure, and I think in that case, Samsung allowed the use of generative AI. So we circle back right to the perhaps prudenceness of having an AI policy and understanding the implications, especially on your IP. But that's exactly right. You want to avoid a kind of worst case scenario where you no longer have that trade secret.
Got it. So you mentioned earlier there have been some lawsuits already, Jane, in this area. Knowing that there are a few lawyers, I think, in the audience today, but mostly non-lawyers. What are some cases of interest for those who are following along from the sidelines on the legal landscape?
Right, so most of the current cases have involved kind of the big names AI companies and being taken to court for infringement, misappropriation, illegally scraping data, that sort of thing. And a lot of it involves images and music, and not quite in the government contracts arena yet, but that's probably coming. A few cases that I would recent ones that I would like to also mention. In October of 2023, in Jobiek LLC versus Botmakers LLC, an AI intelligence-based recruitment platform, Jobiek, sued Tarta AI in California. They say that their competitor violated their copyrights by scraping its database and using that information to power their own database. And that's rather intriguing. So I think that that's along the lines of I see that the link has been put up. That's just an interesting one, I think. So we'll see how that works itself out. The claims involved are copyright infringement, violation of Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, as well as unfair competition. So that's interesting as well. Another one I want to mention for probably key toward the audience, Thomson Reuters versus Ross Intelligence. That was in September in Delaware. This is interesting because in Delaware, the federal court denied a number of summary judgment requests on both sides. So this, I think, is a good one to kind of read. I don't want to be hard to get into details on in this format, but it's the first summary judgment ruling regarding fair use of copyrighted material to train generative AI models. So it alleges unauthorized use of proprietary content from Thomson's Westlaw. And you're probably very familiar with that tool already. So that's a good one, I think, to look at. And the court highlighted some differences under copyright law. Now, these things I'm talking about, this sounds to me like a traditional copyright type of scenario. It doesn't sound really that, unique, special to AI. So I think that's another reason to kind of look at it and think about it, because the general thinking is that the law hasn't caught up to some of these issues in the AI arena. And I think that's true, especially for generative AI, but this is really, these issues are more traditional issues. Lastly, the last thing I want to mention is this just happened on Monday. A lot of things happened on Monday, the executive order, and then this other case, Anderson versus Stability AI Limited, Northern District of California. On October 30th, the judge dismissed all but one claim from a proposed class action suit by artists accusing these software companies of using their works to train the software programs. So an interesting kind of side issue in this is there were a number of artists that tried to join in this suit, but only one plaintiff of the various, I don't remember exactly how many, but 4 or 5 sets of artists, only one of them had registrations on 16 of her art collections. So that's key. This is, again, traditional copyright. The way copyright law, you're protected by copyright as you express in a novel way, or even sometimes not in a novel way. Your expression, as soon as your expression is affixed to a media, you've got copyright protection. But if you don't have it registered, And a lot of companies, you're not normally going to take the time to register every copyright that you hold. Then you don't get damages. Then it's difficult to bring claims. So again, this is a very standard copyright issue. And we'll see what these plaintiffs do. The case is still alive. There's a big discussion in there about various topics, not just copyright protection, but the judge, I think, was very wise in the way they rule on this, so that if they revise their claims, some of these claims are going to continue on, and I think it's going to be a really interesting case to watch. And that's called, again, Anderson versus Stability AI Limited. So I think
great. Thanks, Jane. Marlena, back to you. So what else should a GovCon consider? Just practical terms, right? What are some of the other considerations in using or developing generative AI?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched on looking at the licensing terms and the importance of that. I think, and ownership, right? I think that's going to be the main one, and then compliance with your contracts, making sure that you're not putting in CUI or information that belongs to the government that can't be uploaded, for example, into AI. But then, data integrity from a higher, kind of taking a step back. I think, France, you've mentioned a couple of times, right? This is not a complete solution. And so when companies are going to use AI, they're going to want some type of human interaction, I think is a best practice, to verify that what's being produced is actually, accurate, complete. And so I think, setting policies that we've talked about, thinking those through, what makes sense for your business, and then what is the government requiring, like keeping up with these regulations, keeping up with these task force, the guidance that's coming out, I think is going to be really important, especially for government contractors.
Right. So, Jane, what are some of the things that government contractors can do? They want to use generative AI. They see the benefits, but they want to mitigate the risks. So what are just some very practical steps or things that a government contractor can do today, right now?
It's the same things they do now, but compounded. For example, if you're a government contractor, you're using AI, you need to make sure that you don't inadvertently run afoul of the False Claims Act. You could have without human oversight, you could have inadvertent conclusions made, or capabilities that happen that result in outputs that are not correct. You don't want this to happen with one of your government contractors. So your engineers and your developers, of course, are going to be way more aware of this than the proposal shop, but this is a risk that you need to be really sensitive to it if you're going to use generative AI. And you need to always be aware that AI can magnify an error. It can compound an error across your whole system. Unlike if you're using a manual process, a manual formula, you're using an Excel spreadsheet, you have an error, maybe it affects 2 or 3 other spreadsheets in your accounting department, and that's it. But if you're using generative AI for some formulations, there's an error that could really get magnified. The other thing related to that is you need to have good data. So if you're someone who's really developing AI, you've got a database, you don't want stale data. So you need your data to be updated all the time. I think it's what is evidenced in some of this case law is maybe some of these software companies who are being taken to court, they're desperate for more data, maybe, and they just were creative in their ways that they were accessing data. Maybe a little ahead of the game. So that's another thing to keep in mind with respect to these tools. Another one that we haven't talked about yet is, as a government contractor, you're thinking about all the time, and that is when you're going after some solicitations, you're going to enter into teaming agreements and subcontract agreements with third parties. either during the proposal stage where you're crafting the proposal, or during, if you win a deal, the performance stage. So you need to now, prime contractors have always needed to understand the context of how their teaming partners operate. Now you need to do that even more. You may need to have some, if you've got an AI deliverable that they're working on with you, maybe you need to add some clauses to your teaming agreement, maybe some additional warranties, maybe just some additional provisions to make sure you've got that area covered. And then with respect to the flip, if you're a subcontractor in the government space, you're not a prime, you need to be aware of this. And, you know, you maybe have an expertise where you've developed your own data as a subcontractor and you've developed some of your own tools. Your prime contractor, on behalf of the agency, needs to now own some of that. Is that going to be okay with you? And what about your data test pools that you've worked hard to develop? Is this something you're selling to the prime, or do you need to have some reservations in some of the provisions of the team? You might be doing this at the teaming stage, or with the sub, you need to figure out what is really needed for the prime contract, what's going to really flow down to you as the subcontractor. So, you know, you've got two different perspectives, and you're trying to work together to provide a good solution for your government customer.
Right. Marlena and Jane, I think we should turn to Q&A now. Erica, I think we have a question.
We do. So Karen wants to know on the regulatory side of things, I've lost the question, there it is. How is AI being addressed in the CMMC?
Sure.
So I can start on that one a little bit. So CMMC is the Cyber Maturity Model Certification that it's not quite ready yet with third-party auditors, but it's something that every government contractor that I know of is preparing for, and they're going through all those requirements. So CMMC is in version 2.0 right now. Of course, and I don't remember when they came out, maybe a year and a half ago or something like that. You could look that up and see when it came out. But of course, when that came out, that 2.0 didn't have the advantage of the executive order that was just announced on Monday. So I'm thinking maybe there'll be another version, but even if it doesn't specifically address AI right now, all of the procedures and protocols in CMMC, I think they're going to apply to the development process, to the compliance process, to the procedures that you're going to have in your company anyway. It's just going to be a little bit harder for the government contractors to, you know, figure that out. They're going to have to go back and look at what they've already done and address AI as they go. And then I'm wondering, is there going to be the next version of CMMC? That's my answer. I don't know, Marlena, what do you?
No, I think that's right. I think you know, ultimately the purpose of CMMC compliance is still there, right? And so you're still have to go through the certification, especially a DoD contractor. You know, the purpose is to protect sensitive government data, government information, and so that's still going to apply, whether it's AI or not.
Great. Thank you both. It does not look like we have any other questions at the moment, so I'll just ask a broad one. Let's fast forward 3 years. Where are we at? How is generative AI being used? How is it being regulated? How is it being implemented by government contractors? So Marlena, why don't you start?
Yeah, so 3 years you said, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, I think there's going to be more regulation. So right now we're seeing, I think, task force and guidance, right? Some regulation, but mostly we're in the initial stages. of developing that regulation. So I think we're going to see more concrete, hopefully, regulations, but I also unfortunately think that there's going to be some conflicting regulations, perhaps, right? Coming from different agencies. You know, it's going to be a while until we get a good set of rules. You know, those rules develop over time, trial and error, right? Thinking through and different scenarios that actually happen, litigations that occur, you know, defining the intent behind the regulation. I think that is going to continue to develop. And unfortunately, I don't think it will be, you know, within the next 3 years, but I think we're going to start seeing some of those regulations and probably more litigation in that space to try to figure out, you know, what are the rules that everybody needs to play by.
Great. Jane, what's your prediction?
I think there are going to be tremendous opportunities for those that can figure it out. One thing that I'm thinking about is the military needs some of these implementations yesterday, right? In its defense systems, et cetera. And at the same time, as stated in the executive order, the government also wants to promote opportunities for small businesses. And I think there are going to be really big opportunities there for small businesses. An example is, I recently attended the AUSA annual meeting, and one of the things they were talking about was the Army Cyber program and how they are really focusing on small business innovation research, small business technology transfer. They had examples of companies there who have successfully navigated the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 projects through cyber. And an example of what the companies a need, for example, just I'll throw out an example. The battlefield is different than commercial implementations. There's opportunities in both arenas. There's opportunities in FedCiv as well. Let's just not talk only DoD. But for example, some technical folks may be familiar with a thing I learned about, which is called LiDAR. And it's a sensor process. They use light sensors to make maps. It's a heavily formulaic process to quantify how this is done. And they use these in combat vehicles right now, but computation power is an issue. And maybe there's a way with generative AI to replace some of these already very successful systems for adjusting and making maps for combat vehicles. Maybe there's a way to do that with generative AI, and to not have to worry about the lack of computation power, or maybe the lack of enough data to do it. So I just think huge opportunities for those that can figure it out.
Great. Jane and Marlena, this has been terrific. Thank you for putting a bow on our webinar series on the intersection of generative AI, government contracts, government contracting, and the law. It's been great. I'm sure Erica will share in the notes or in the follow-up emails how to get a hold of you, either of you, if one of our attendees would like to follow up with a specific question. With that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Erica to close things up.